The Eternal Performance. The air in the grand ballroom felt like static electricity trapped in a tomb. David sat on a high-backed, velvet-upholstered chair that had been dragged into the center of the room, his eyes glued to a wall of monitors that flickered with the frantic, sweat-slicked faces of his captives. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, a metronome for a symphony of suffering. "Action," he whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. Across the room, the group stood huddled together, a jagged, desperate mosaic of humanity and something else. Rachel and Sarah, their skin unnaturally pale and their eyes rimmed with the bruised violet of the shadow touched, stood slightly in front of the others. Their bodies were coiled, ready to spring, though the weight of the contract David had forced upon them still hummed under their skin like a parasite. Beside them, Anya's hands were trembling. She held a heavy, iron-bound tome, its pages fluttering in a breeze that didn't exist. She was the anchor, and the anchor was slipping. "Look at them," David chuckled, gesturing toward the monitors. "The ensemble cast of the century. And yet, the pacing is sluggish. Where is the terror? The screaming? Where is the performance?" "The show is over, David," Emily said, her voice steady despite the way her knuckles were white against the handle of a makeshift stake. Her medical background fought against the mounting evidence of the supernatural, but her pragmatic mind had finally synthesized a truth: the director was the linchpin. If he fell, the curtain dropped. David leaned forward, the shadows in the room seemingly bending toward him, drawn by his malice. "The show ends when I say it ends. And I'm thinking a blood-drenched finale. Perhaps a betrayal? A lingering close-up on the moment their humanity snaps?" He raised his hand, and the heavy iron chandelier above them groaned. It began to swing, faster and faster, rattling the ancient chains that secured it to the rotting ceiling. The vampire thralls, the creatures that had been stalking them through the halls for hours, poured from the shadows, their eyes glowing like dying embers in the dark. "Now," Sarah whispered to Anya. Anya didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand onto the pages of the book, chanting a sequence of syllables that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. The air in the ballroom shrieked. It wasn't just a spell, it was a rupture. The reality David had meticulously curated for his broadcast began to fray at the edges. The monitors sparked and exploded in a shower of glass and blue light, the dark web feed cutting to static. The manor groaned, not the settling of old wood, but the scream of a structure being torn from its foundations. "No." David stood, his composure shattering like the screens. "You don't get to ruin the lighting. You don't get to ruin the framing." The shadows in the room surged, no longer obeying David's subtle orchestration. They rose like liquid ink from the floorboards, blacker than the surrounding gloom. Rachel and Sarah felt it first, the pull, the call. It was a cold, familiar ache in their marrow. "He's losing his grip on the room," Anya yelled over the roar of the crumbling architecture. "He can't control the shadows if we claim them first." The vampires lunged, but they were no longer coordinated predators. The disruption of the manor's mystical geography had left them reeling, their movements jerky and uncertain. Rachel moved with a speed that blurred the air. She didn't strike with human strength, she struck with the force of an oncoming tide. A sweep of her arm sent a wave of darkness spiraling out, slamming into a charging thrall and pinning it against the wall with the weight of 1,000 knights. Sarah followed, her shadow-wreathed hands tearing through the ethereal hold David had on the room's energy. She wasn't just fighting, she was dismantling the director's stage. "You are just props," David screamed, his voice distorting into a dissonant, multitonal screech. He moved toward them, his fingers lengthening into needle-like talons. "You are just ink on a page that I wrote." "The author is dead," Rachel spat, her voice layered with a hollow, supernatural reverb. She and Sarah moved in perfect, terrifying tandem, their movements a dance of death. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the apex predators the manor had birthed, and they were finally hungry for the one thing that mattered, the man who had turned their lives into a spectacle. David backpedaled, his eyes wide, as the walls of the ballroom began to peel away, revealing the dark, churning sea outside. The manor was dying, and David, tethered to its heartbeat, felt the toll. He clawed at the air, trying to summon more thralls, more barriers, but the magic had turned traitor. The floor beneath them buckled. Debris rained down, splinters of Gothic grandeur and chunks of century-old stone. The group surged forward, a tide of desperate humans and emboldened shadows, closing the distance between them and their torturer. David's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He realized then that the performance hadn't failed because of bad actors. It had failed because the actors had rewritten the script. He reached out, his hand glowing with a sickly, necrotic light, aiming not for a kill, but for a final, desperate act of destruction. "If I can't have the show," he hissed, his voice trembling, "I'll burn the entire theater down with all of you inside it." He lunged toward Anya, the source of the disruption. But before he could reach her, the room exploded in a flash of obsidian black light, Rachel and Sarah's shadow manipulation reaching its breaking point. The floor collapsed entirely, sending them all sliding toward the jagged, yawning maw of the cliffside beneath the manor. "Now!" Sarah screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Emily, now!" The director stood exposed, teetering on the edge of the abyss, his control over the manor's architecture slipping away as the walls around them dissolved into mist. He looked down at the encroaching dark, then up at them, his eyes reflecting the void he had once controlled.